The road stretched deeper into the forest. The sun was slowly sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Cheerful music played from the speakers, and the mood inside the SUV was upbeat. Dan was behind the wheel, focused on navigating the bumpy road. In the passenger seat sat his girlfriend Kate, chatting about how she had dreamed of a trip like this for years. In the back seat, Max and his girlfriend Sophia cuddled, laughing at some joke. Next to them sat John, Max's cousin. He was silent, staring out the window as if sensing that something wasn't right. "About 30 kilometers left," Dan said, glancing at the GPS. "Then it's just forest, tents, and a full disconnect from the world." "Finally," Sophia sighed, stretching. "No internet, no people, no work. Just us and nature." They had been driving for almost 3 hours. The road was getting more and more deserted. Rusted road signs lined the roadside, as if forgotten by time. Wind blew leaves and dust across the road. Suddenly, there was a dull bang. The car jolted. "What the—" Dan hit the brakes and pulled over to the side. When everyone got out, it was obvious. The rear tire was flat. And not just punctured, it was shredded, as if they'd driven over sharp nails. "Perfect," Max muttered, inspecting the damage. "And the spare's dead too." "Is there a workshop nearby?" Kate asked, wiping her hands on her jeans. "No signal," John said, looking at his phone screen. "Total dead zone." They stood there in silence, exchanging glances. Then they decided to try pushing the car to the nearest house. Half an hour later, through the thick brush, a rooftop appeared, an old wooden house surrounded by a tall fence. It looked strangely well kept, too clean for such a remote place. There was a garage to the side, and even an antenna on the roof. They knocked. An elderly man with silver hair, a hooked nose, and piercing eyes opened the door. His lips stretched into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Good evening," Dan began. "We had a flat tire, and the nearest town is pretty far. We thought maybe—" Yes, the old man interrupted. "Pull the car into the yard. We've got a garage. My son will take care of it." He called into the house. "Jimmy, come on out, we've got visitors." Out came a woman in her 70s with white hair tied in a bun. Grandma Samantha. She said nothing, just stared at the group. Then came Jimmy, a broad-shouldered, heavy-set man with a stern expression. He looked to be in his mid-30s. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked anything but pleased to see them. "To the garage," he said gruffly. The group pulled the car into the yard and looked around. Everything was eerily tidy. No dust, no trash, too clean. "We really appreciate it," Max said. "We'll owe you a bottle if you can help." The old man smirked. "Keep your bottle. Just stay for dinner. It's getting late anyway. We'll take care of the tire in the morning." Sophia shivered slightly. John remained silent. "I think I'll go for a walk," John said, and slipped out through the gate. Kate leaned toward Dan and whispered, "They're kind of weird, don't you think?" Dan shrugged. "They're just old. It's fine." Dinner was strange. The table was set for 6. Meat, potatoes, pie. Everything was delicious. Too delicious. Jimmy barely spoke. Samantha just watched them eat. And the old man told stories, too brutal to be just stories. Tales about hunting, about bones in the forest, about uninvited guests. When the group finally went upstairs to sleep, John looked out the window. Jimmy stood in the yard. He was staring at the car, then at the house, and he was smiling. The morning turned out unexpectedly foggy. A white veil blanketed the yard and the forest around them, as if someone didn't want them to see where they could escape. Dan, Max, and John stood near the car. The tire had been removed. And Jimmy was silently working with a jack and a toolbox. "How long is it going to take?" Max asked. Jimmy didn't reply. He just grunted and kept working. His movements weren't rushed, just slow, strangely calm, almost lazy, as if he knew they all had plenty of time. Meanwhile, Sophia and Kate were exploring the yard. They peeked into the old barn behind the house. Inside were piles of junk, rusty gas cans, tools, and something else. In the corner, beneath a torn tarp, Kate noticed strange dark stains on the floor. She stepped closer. The smell hit her. "Looks like blood," she whispered. "Could be meat or animals," Sophia replied uncertainly. "They live in the woods. Maybe they hunt." Kate nodded, but the uneasy feeling didn't go away. That evening, Grandpa George suggested dinner again. This time, everything felt quieter. Hardly anyone spoke at the table. Grandma Samantha served the girls larger portions than the others and never touched her own food. Dan and Max discussed asking Jimmy to finish the tire first thing in the morning and getting out. John barely touched his food. He kept looking out the window, glancing around nervously. "You know," John suddenly said, "last night Jimmy went out to the car. He was checking it, and looking through our backpacks, I saw him. Maybe he just wanted to make sure nothing was stolen." Max tried to reassure him. "You're being paranoid." "No," John snapped. "He was going through our stuff. I'm sure of it." Later that night, in the room, Kate told Dan about what she found in the barn. Dan was concerned, but still hesitant. "We'll leave tomorrow, that's all. Just a bunch of weirdos, nothing more." That same evening, Sophia woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen. As she passed the staircase, she heard voices. George and Samantha were whispering, but their words were clear. "The boys don't suspect anything," George said. "The sun will start tomorrow. We'll begin with the redhead. She'll taste the best." "And the others," hissed Samantha. "John sees too much. He'll run first, into the woods. That's where we finish him. Don't touch the girls yet. They're soft." Sophia stood frozen in the dark, not breathing. Then, without a sound, she returned to the room. Her heart pounded. "Max," she whispered, shaking him gently. "We have to go, now." Max woke up slowly, not understanding at first. But when he heard what she said, he turned pale. "Tomorrow morning, no questions. We pack, and we leave." John was already awake. He'd heard it all. His eyes were wide open. The silence in the house was suffocating. Even the air felt heavier. Kate hadn't come back. Dan clenched his fists, standing in the hallway. John scanned the room like a cornered animal. Sophia sat quietly in a chair, clinging to Max. She was trembling all over. "We're looking for her," said Grandpa George, as if talking about a lost kitten. "Maybe she went to relieve herself, or into the woods. There's plenty of space around here." "Stop it," John exhaled. "She wouldn't just leave, especially not alone. Something's wrong here." "Maybe she just," Max started to say, but stopped under John's glare. "Listen," John continued, "I'm going to check the barn, alone. If I don't come back in 5 minutes, run." Dan wanted to argue, but John was already out the door. Outside, it was overcast. A light rain began to tap on the roof. John made his way to the barn. The door was closed, but not locked. He pushed it open. Creak. It was dark inside. It smelled of dampness, metal, and something rotten. John turned on his phone's flashlight. The beam lit up a workbench, butcher knives, chains, hooks, and in the corner, her jacket, slashed and stained with blood. John froze. He slowly walked closer and saw, under the jacket was a woman's hand, pale, motionless. He didn't scream. He just stepped back, then turned and ran, stumbling. "Kate," Dan gasped as John burst into the house. "Where is she?" Dead, John whispered. They killed her, in the barn. We need to go, now. At that moment, the lights in the house went out. Outside, the sound of the gate being locked echoed. Jimmy. The old man stood up from his chair. Well, kids, time to play. Whoever survives walks free. Are you insane? Dan shouted. You psychos. George raised his shotgun. Into the woods. You've got 5 minutes head start. Then the hunt begins. John grabbed Max and Sophia. Dan hesitated, staring at the gun, but bolted at the last second. They ran through the trees, branches slapping their faces. Their hearts pounded like they might explode. We have to split up, John shouted. We'll have better chances. They split. John and Max ran ahead. Dan took Sophia in the other direction. Darkness was closing in. The forest seemed to thicken, turning into a maze. Branches cracked. Somewhere behind them, a whistle. Grandpa was clearly enjoying the game. Dan dragged Sophia along, but she stumbled, cried out, and grabbed her ankle. I can't, she whispered. My ankle. I twisted it. Dan knelt beside her, checked. Not broken, but she couldn't move fast. We hide, he said. Over there in those bushes. We'll figure it out later. They crawled under a fallen tree, trying to stay quiet. Then came Jimmy's voice, calm, heavy. He passed just a few meters away carrying an axe. His eyes scanned the area. He almost saw them. Almost. But walked on. Dan pulled Sophia closer. We'll get out of this, I promise. Meanwhile, John and Max came upon the old barn. They opened the door. Inside was a trap. A pit covered with boards. John stopped Max just before he stepped in. This was meant for us, John said. We have to find a weapon, or a way to call for help. I saw a basement in the house, John replied. There's a radio, an old one. I saw it when I was looking for a charger. Maybe we can send a signal. They decided to return at night. Dan helped Sophia back out. They were cautiously walking along a stream when they heard a snap. From behind the trees, Jimmy, he saw them, shouted, charged. Dan grabbed a stick, hit him over the head. It didn't stop him. Another strike. Jimmy knocked him to the ground. Sophia screamed. And then, a gunshot. Jimmy jolted, letting out a guttural, inhuman sound. He dropped to his knees and slowly collapsed into the water. At the edge of the stream stood Grandpa George, holding the shotgun. He stared at his son's body. Silently, his hands trembled. Jimmy, he whispered. A mistake? Or on purpose? But he had just killed his own son. Dan and Sophia scrambled backward, stunned. And then, they ran. John and Max were hiding in an old storage shed. In the distance, screams. Then, silence again. This is just the beginning, John whispered. We're not in hell. Yet. The fog descended on the forest once again. It crept along the ground, blanketing every tree, every path. Everything looked the same, like a nightmare where you walk in circles. Only breathing, only rustling, and fear. Dan and Sophia limped, clinging to Dan. After the encounter with Jimmy, her ankle had begun to swell. Dan tore bark from nearby trees to make a makeshift bandage. He was shaking, not from cold, but from helplessness. We can't stay in one place for long, he whispered. They'll find us. Or what's left of them will. You saw how he looked at him, Sophia whispered. George, when he shot his own son, that wasn't a mistake. You think he meant to? Sophia didn't answer. She just stared into the fog. Somewhere out there in the pale mist, a shadow flickered. Thin, tall, almost feminine. Dan squeezed her hand. We'll survive. I'll get you out of here. John and Max John gripped the axe he'd taken from the barn, staring into the darkness. Max was frantically trying to repair the old radio in the basement of the house. A dusty Soviet-era military receiver, the R326, buzzed to life. What are you doing? John asked. If I can get even a shortwave signal working. Max twisted the dials desperately. I might be able to send a distress call. Someone could hear us. John listened. In the headphones, static. Then, a voice? Repeat. Who is on this frequency? Yes. Max exhaled. That's someone from a nearby station. Tell them where we are. Hurry. Just then, the basement light flickered. Footsteps right above them. Someone was in the house. Heavy, slow, dragging feet. John rushed to the door and locked it from the inside. His eyes caught scratches on the inner side of the door, as if someone else had tried to escape this room before and failed, creaking floorboards overhead. Then, Samanda's voice. Don't be scared, little ones. Grandma made dinner. John froze. He looked at Max. Max was whispering into the mic without stopping. Help us. We're trapped in the house. An old cabin off the northern road. One of us is injured. They killed our friends. Please. Suddenly the door rattled violently. Someone was pounding on it. Not with fists, with something heavy, like a crowbar. Go, John shouted. Now! They climbed out the basement window into the cold, wet forest. Behind them, a chilling, inhuman shriek. That wasn't the old woman. It was something else. Dan and Sophia. They walked along a ravine when they heard footsteps. But it wasn't just one person. There were others in the forest. 3, maybe 4. Sophia began to cry. They're following us. I can't do this anymore. Dan held her close. Then he turned his head sharply. A figure emerged from the mist, Samanda. But her face wasn't right. It was expressionless, like a mask, pale and stretched. She stared at them silently, without blinking. Get back, Dan shouted. He grabbed a rock and threw it. She vanished instantly, as if she had never been there at all. Sophia whispered, They're not human. They're not just killers. They're something older, something animal. John and Max lured George to an old forest bridge. Earlier, John had spotted an overgrown bear trap nearby. Massive, rusted, with metal spikes. Hey, you sick bastard, Max shouted. George emerged from the bushes, calmly raising his shotgun. He was quiet, almost sad. You ran well, he said, but everything ends eventually. John darted to the side, drawing his attention. Max stepped backward, and George stepped directly into the trap. Metal slammed shut. A scream, raw, animalistic. He collapsed. The shotgun flew from his hands. John approached, axe in hand. He looked into George's eyes and froze. 42, the old man rasped. You're number 42. I knew someone would make it. And then he laughed, choked on his own blood, and went still. By sunrise, the police had arrived. Dan and Sophia, John and Max were sitting on the roadside, wrapped in blankets. Sophia was rambling. Max barely spoke. Dan just stared into the distance. An officer scanned the property. We found remains, people missing over the past 20 years. The woman, the old lady, she's gone. No trace. Not in the house, not in the woods. She's still out there, Sophia whispered. I saw her. She was watching us. The forest won't let her go. One of the cops spoke into his radio. The basement. It's a nightmare. Bones, cages, George's journals. He did this on purpose, for generations. In the ambulance, John spoke one last time before the sedative took hold. This place shouldn't exist. It's alive. It calls to people. A week had passed. The old house had burned down. The fire started under mysterious circumstances. Locals claimed lightning struck the roof directly. Firefighters found only charred walls and a basement filled with ash. Whatever had been there was no more. Almost. But the horrifying discoveries didn't burn with the fire. Police uncovered the remains of 41 people. Skulls, piles of bones, fragments of personal belongings, backpacks, bracelets, children's sneakers. Some of them belonged to people who had gone missing 10, even 15 years ago. Beneath the barn, a metal container buried in the ground. Inside, George's journals. He kept records, every name, age, method of execution, cooking time, comments. Skinny ones, not filling. Women's ribs dry out too quickly. The best are those who resist. Their meat stays warm. Dan, Sophia, Max and John became national news. Their faces were everywhere. But none of them gave interviews. None of them smiled. Dan shut himself off, disappeared from social media, didn't answer messages, not even from family. Occasionally, someone spotted him on the street, disheveled, hollow-eyed, distant. Sophia was placed in a psychiatric clinic. After everything, she could no longer speak. Doctors called it post-traumatic mutism. But there was something else in her eyes. Something like she still heard footsteps at night. Max started drinking, a lot. He was questioned by investigators, but he always said the same thing. They weren't just a family. They were something ancient. They didn't die. They disappeared. They were part of the forest. John was the only one who tried to understand. He read the journals, dug into archives. He found an old newspaper clipping. Back in 1956, people had gone missing in that same house. Back then, it belonged to George's parents. Nothing was ever proven. John began collecting materials, documents, maps. He wanted to tell the world. And then, he vanished. A month later, a young woman, around 20, was driving down the same road. Her GPS suddenly froze. Music played in her ears. She sang along, until a loud pop stopped her. A tire, flat, punctured. She cursed, pulled over, got out. The road was empty. On the asphalt, a handful of rusty nails. She turned her head. A few hundred meters into the trees stood an old gate. Behind it, a house. Clean, almost new. And on the porch, an old woman, grey-haired, smiling. That same smile. "Ghost," she sang softly. Sophia opened her eyes. She was lying in a hospital bed, an IV in her arm. White ceiling, white walls. Outside the window, silence. And in that silence, something stirred. She slowly turned her head. On the other side of the glass stood Grandma Samantha, alive, or not quite. She was smiling for a long time, unblinking. And then she raised a finger to her lips, shh, and disappeared. The house can burn, the trees can fall, but true evil never dies. It waits for the next one, for someone who takes the wrong turn, for someone who doesn't hear the whisper in the wind, and who once again becomes someone's next meal.